talk more about this topic today because it's extremely important for us to continue to take homage of why we're asking you to do your own research and to increase your political education so you can essentially make a behavior change. That's what we're asking you all to do. And so we have come up with some points that we'd like to discuss today that will support why we're asking you to make this behavior change and hopefully shed some more light on the importance of this behavior change so that you can see, how this change will affect you all, hopefully on a large level and eventually, hopefully on a mass level, right? Depending on how much of this change we can get to pass on to other people. So, yes, we're talking to you all today, but we're also hoping that you'll share what you learned from today, along with the other research that you're going to do on your own time. We're hoping you'll share that with other people who may not be able to join this broadcast today, or who may not have a YouTube account, or who may not have a device that has Coltan that can broadcast the account, right? The objective is to get more people to change their behaviors, which sometimes is rooted in sharing things that we have picked up along the way. So, when we talk about refining the playing field, we're trying to make the argument that this is something we need to think and act on so we can unlink our interest with the oppressor. And you can base any example that we can think about when we talk about other celebrated institutions in this world, specifically ones that are targeting oppressed people and people who are suffering in some way, shape, or form. With every single institution that you can think of that celebrates oppression of some type, you can think about how it's connected to capitalism. You can think about that. We can think about how every single month out of the 12 months in the year is supposed to be dedicated in some way, shape, or form to some type of institution where you need to go out and spend money to the point where we don't even have months where there is nothing going on. So we have the more popular ones that we know about, where you have, New Year's Day in January, you have so-called Valentine's Day in February. We have the truth and based, really not even based on ethics or principles at all, with March 17th, which you would refer to as St. Patrick's Day. And then, we have the Resurrection Day in April, and so on and so forth throughout the year. And so I guess the point that we're trying to make today is, when did you decide? When did your family members decide that you all would start celebrating those institutions? I just really think you should think about that, because the objective that we're trying to get across to you all, the point we're trying to make, is that it was always instilled in you that you would celebrate it, because that's what being a good quote unquote American looks like. That's what being a quote unquote normal person looks like. A normal person wouldn't resist and push back. But we have to kind of dig a little bit deeper, because again, then the question becomes, if you personally didn't decide that you wanted to start celebrating it, then who is pushing for you to celebrate it, and why are you celebrating it if you don't really know what the basis of the institution is really about? And that's like, if we really unpack that, because unthanksgiving or thanks-taking is not about you getting together with your families and having a meal where someone has slaved over the kitchen, probably the whole week leading up to that. And then there's probably some, very gendered roles or very focused patriarchal or sexist values that are attached with that. And then, you have the football game on and the family is there, and whatever else you're doing, whatever quote unquote traditions you have for that time. If it were that simple, we wouldn't be in a lot of the neo-colonial spaces that we find ourselves in today. If it were that simple, we wouldn't be talking about this topic, because we wouldn't be trying to shed light on the fact that it's not that simple, because we're talking about wiping out an entire group of people. That's what this day represents. And it blows my mind every year that people are so ignorant and they have no idea. So I started really wondering, have they done the research? I'm very privileged. My parents have instilled that in me since I was in the womb. I'm extremely privileged to know that this day is not a day of celebration. This is not a happy day, if you will. When I get through the year, as the months go on, I don't quote unquote look forward to thankstaking. This is a day of sorrow. It's a day of sadness for me. I didn't know any of these indigenous people who passed away, but I think about their spirits every single day. Yes, but especially in this month, because so many people just completely don't acknowledge that they were killed. I think about our indigenous femme people and how they suffered being raped at the hands of these nasty ass Europeans who had no business putting their hands on them. I think about the children and how scared they were that their parents were under attack and they probably didn't feel like there was anything they could do to help them. I think about the fact that we are on these people's land today, and I see people throwing cigarettes out the window when I'm driving behind them. I see them throwing out cups on the ground. They have no respect for this environment. And they have no respect for the fact that this is somebody else's land. But yet, if you walked in their house and you threw your cup on their ground, they'd be ready to fight you. So these are some serious, serious behaviors that we are asking you to evaluate on a serious, serious level, which means you're going to have to separate it being about you. You're going to have to separate that because unless you identify as indigenous, this is not about you. This is about you understanding that the indigenous people need your help, which means your ignorance is not going to help them. So when you refine the playing field, that means you are unpacking why you do the things you do under capitalism. And if you truly unpack it in an ethical and an honest way, you will start to realize that you have no idea why you do the things you do because you never made the decision to start doing them. The system had already communicated to you that this is what you need to start doing. And it started framing it for you where you would start seeing media, you'd see commercials, you'd see things that helped you associate with the different institutions for the different months. I think about how technically right after so-called Xmas, we see hearts and we see Valentine's Day cards. And it's amazing to me because we haven't even got to New Year's yet. But we see it out because the systems and the organizations, the companies, they know that they have got to be quick in terms of putting their stuff out first. You know why? Because from an imperialist standpoint, they understand that they are competing with other organizations and other companies to get your dollar. So if they put their stuff out first, you probably will be more inclined to buy from them than to buy from Target. If Dollar Tree gets their stuff out before Walmart, you're probably more inclined to buy from Dollar Tree than you are from Target. Everybody is out for your dollar. That's what capitalism is. So we have to think more about why we're doing the things that we're doing. And that starts with understanding why you're celebrating institutions and this backward system that have never, ever, ever cared about humanity at all. So why would they start now? And if you really understand that, then you understand that every single institution that is celebrated, at least in the American space, is not celebrated from a humane standpoint. As I just said, this is a holiday that talks about how we should be happy that people were murdered. We should be happy that people were murdered, you all. I don't find that to be a happy thing. Do you? I don't find that to be a good thing that we should smile about. That is a horrible thing. It's atrocious. It makes me want to throw up when I think about that. And the last thing I would think to do is eat a bunch of food, knowing that that's the same day that people were attacked and they lost their land. That's the same day that people lost their respect. That's the same day that everybody decided not to value indigenous people anymore. That makes me feel disgusted. That makes me feel ashamed. That makes me feel like I need to do something different in my life. So I'm very grateful for the All African People's Revolutionary Party. I'm grateful that my parents chose to organize with this organization. I'm grateful that they insisted on taking me to events that were hosted by the American Indian movement so that I had exposure very early on, where I was able to learn and read about different strategies and different ways that indigenous people were trying to exist and to try to get back their gosh darn respect in this backward system. I'm grateful that the sunrise service is still happening to this day at Alcatraz. I'm grateful that my parents insisted that I go to it. I'm grateful that the indigenous people are still trying to let people know we're here. We have been strongly wronged, and we will put an end to it because we are working to get our land back. But as a former oppressed person who also understands what that means, I am working very hard with the All African People's Revolutionary Party so that we can support them, because their struggle is not separate from our struggle. And so when we think about understanding the basis of these institutions, then we can start to better understand why we should not be celebrating them, you all. If we lived in an environment where people actually mattered, I wouldn't be making the same argument. But that's not where we live. We live in a world where people don't matter, especially if they don't have a lot of money. That's the world that we live in. So if we understand where these institutions are coming from, we can start to think more for ourselves. That's the other piece that I was trying to say earlier is none of the decisions that you've made in your life, for the most part, have been based on you taking ownership or advocacy. They've been based on how society has formulated and set the agenda for you to make these decisions. So again, if you understand the basis of these institutions, you can start to make different choices on whether or not you want to keep celebrating them. And maybe you do, but I strongly doubt you're listening to this seminar if you didn't already see a problem with unthanksgiving. So because you know there's a problem with it, you should do as much research as you can so that you can help other people understand that there's a problem with it. And so that we can, for once, start to celebrate the indigenous people and the right for them to have their land back. So we can start to celebrate that what happened to them was not okay. So we can start to celebrate that their story is not over, and we need to tell their story as much as we can from a humble ally standpoint so that other people can really understand that this has always been the way it's been. It was just never communicated because indigenous people don't matter, just like other colonized people. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. And I'll just say, one more point I wanted to make from the previous slide, but it leads into this slide too. The other piece about really understanding why we do what we do is really because a lot of the choices and behaviors that we're currently displaying are based on a reflection of the system we live in, which is not a humane system. So again, like these choices that we're making are because our enemies are deeming them to be worthy choices. So we don't want to align with the enemy. We want to push back as much as we can. We want to resist as much as we can. We want to try to take a different step and a different approach so that we can make a change, because we don't want the indigenous people to continue to not have their land. We want to try to fight as much as we can so that they can get closer and closer and closer and closer to getting their land back. And in doing that, we're helping to change how people look and think about indigenous people, but we're also helping their struggle by helping our struggle and vice versa. Because we helping them to get their land back helps us get one step closer to being less oppressed and to getting our land back, and vice versa. And in helping the indigenous people, we can continue to work on helping the Palestinians. We can continue to work on helping the Irish. We can continue to work on helping folks of Asian descent, and so on and so forth. So we can think more about that because, we also live in this society where you're constantly being under a microscope for every choice that you're making, right? Especially if you are a colonized person. If you are femme, if you are marginalized, if you're differently abled, if you're LGBTQ plus, people are constantly watching you, watching your every move and make, right? Constantly under surveillance, right? And so, we think really hard about that because we're going to be judged based on how we give the reaction to what's happening, right? So if that is the case, then we should know that we are standing on the shoulders of ancestors who have all had to make choices, and many times those choices have been to make a difference. We can think about how all of our ancestors, even if you're not African, you still have ancestors that made choices that hopefully made a difference in the world that we live in. And so, since we are looking at that and we're being examined so closely because we're being looked at, but also because we're thinking about our ancestors, then we should understand that we're being examined based on everything we do. So we should choose a path where we can be more humane because people are watching you regardless. So why choose the path of less resistance? Why continue to be like everybody else if you've truly done your research, if you've truly increased your political education, if you have truly made an effort to join an organization that is working for justice, then you don't need to keep practicing the same behavioral practices because you're starting to learn quickly that those practices are non-ethical, they are not humane, they are not good for you, they are not good for your organization's values, and they're not good for the society, which means you're going to start to make some changes. You're going to start to be able to say very easily thankstaking or unthanksgiving. And you're going to start to learn that it started to be uncomfortable and now it's not as uncomfortable because you making these behavioral changes is connected to you being committed to your values and your principles. We gave a seminar, it was probably last year now, about the importance of committing to your values and principles. You can find it on YouTube. But the most important thing from that seminar is that it's very easy for you to just stand for nothing because anybody, can just tack you down and you don't have to worry about defending yourself or thinking about how your ideology is worth protecting or fighting for. But if you actually stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything because anybody can manipulate you. Anybody can change your conditions and you're malleable. So you're ready to be changed in any way, shape, or form. But when you actually commit to your principles, when you actually commit to them, and these are real life scenarios where you're committing to your principles. I was talking to my partner just the other week about what his plans are. And I said, so are you going to be in town with your family for Unthanksgiving? He knows that's the kind of language that I use. He's very familiar with that. And so then he responded to me and he used the word that is traditionally used in our institutions. And then I responded and I said, oh, yeah, so for Unthanksgiving. And I just went right back. So I kept saying and he kept saying the other word, and we just kept having a conversation. I use that word at my job. I use that word with my students when I'm teaching. No one has ever heard me say the word that is usually associated with the institution. And I literally have taken it out of my vocabulary. So I don't even think it benefits me to say it now. To me, that would be considered a bad word because it doesn't acknowledge what has happened to our comrades. And that's the whole purpose of me saying is because I'm trying to resist it and to give word and a head nod to indigenous people. So again, like you understanding the foundation for why you do what you do, that's key, right? That's the first piece. The second piece is once you start to understand that, you should really consider joining an organization that's working for justice and one organization that has a way for you to increase your political education, because you'll be able to increase your political education by learning these foundational principles of these institutions and vice versa. Both of those things will come in handy for you doing your independent research, but also being in an organization where you can collectively do research and read about other comrades who have talked about the contradictions of celebrating, diaspora, imperialist, capitalist Western holidays, where you can start to think, or Western institutions, where you can start to think more about how understanding more about why it's not okay to celebrate them gives you a better headway and get a better lead in so that you can navigate that space a little bit differently. We can also think about how increasing your political education, especially if you pick up credible sources like our comrade Ajamu's book, A Guide for Organizing Defense for Patriarchy and Fascist Violence. Well, Comrade Ajamu lays out ways that you can literally coexist in this world today where you're not necessarily respecting the institutions that are being pushed on you, but you still can navigate through them while committing to your principles and managing to keep up relationships that you have, because it's quite possible that you may work with people who still celebrate these institutions. You may have a relationship with someone who still celebrates these institutions. You may have a child who doesn't agree with you and wants to celebrate these institutions, but you still can commit to your values and principles while still maintaining those relationships. We're not saying you have to choose and pick a side. We're just saying that you should know why you do what you do. And if you believe that it's okay to celebrate a day that celebrates killing and raping people and taking their land, then that's your business. I don't agree with that. I think that that is the most heinous thing that a person could do. The most heinous thing that a person could do, heinous, whatever the word is. So if that's really the case, then that means understanding why you do what you do, joining an organization that's working for justice, increasing your political education, and then learning how to take a stand, learning how to stand up for what you believe in, learning how to share that thought with other people so that they can have a different perspective, so that they can have something new to chew on. It's always scary the first time you rock the boat. Of course, I'm a human. I understand that. I'm not a monster. But at the same time, how are you going to sleep that night if you had an opportunity and you didn't say anything? If you're really committed to helping the Palestinian liberation, then you should be speaking up as much as you can in these spaces where people are ignorant as you know what, talking about Hamas and they don't even know. You should be speaking up as much as you can when Zionist people are surrounding you and saying what they need to say. And yeah, it's risky. I know a colleague right now who might be losing their job because they took a stand. That's life, though, you all. Many of our ancestors had to risk other things, and some of them did not risk something where the outcome was not fatality, but they didn't die for nothing. We understand that they lived so that they could change the conditions for you and I to be on the Zoom or on this YouTube or on this Twitter or whatever way you're live streaming right now. They gave their life for us. And I would argue the indigenous people have given their sacrifices and their life for us too. So they deserve for us to show up for them, which means ideologically, physically, mentally, spiritually, we need to show up for them. They deserve that. They gave us their gosh darn planet and they didn't even have to do that. They could literally knock on my door right now and say, you got to go. And I would be like, you're right. I do. But they have allowed us to stay here because we are working with them and they are kind hearted people. But that doesn't mean that they still get to be manipulated. So they need help. And that means we need to take a stand. That means we need to be uncomfortable. That means we need to speak up. And that means we need to understand the root of why we do what we do. And in understanding that, the political education, the organization that we want to join, the rest will start to fall into place. But you should really start to unpack these institutions, unpack what they mean. Listen very carefully to the Star Spangled Banner. Listen very carefully to the lyrics of the Pledge of Allegiance. Listen very carefully, analyze the words, and just make it make sense. Because if you're on this seminar, then you're probably believing that peace, justice loving people deserve a better opportunity than what we've been given. Then that means that you understand that capitalism is in no way, shape, or form to provide that. So join an organization that's working for justice and understand why you do what you do.
Ashe Shakur, thank you very much. And then just wanted to remind people about Burkina Books, to go there and support our comrades in Burkina Faso. We'll have definitely have the QR code there on the screen. And also just to say that I want to acknowledge, of course, our comrades in the Ilahi, sorry, I can't speak. I'm allergic to capitalism. I apologize. Ilahi Spirit Runners, an indigenous organization that is really trying to build its capacity to fight for indigenous people. So if you are indigenous, you should reach out to them and try to give them whatever energies you have to engage in a struggle for justice and liberation for your people. And they had written that on the day of thankstaking, they will be having self-defense classes. So you should find them online and reach out and support those efforts. That's outstanding. Back in Juneteenth, we did the same thing, had self-defense classes. It's not a day of celebration. These days, we don't have any days of celebration. These are days of liberation. So please acknowledge that and help them in their efforts to do that. And I want to just continue on this question of thanks taking and why we say that. Like, people think we're being funny. I just said it. I was with a group of Africans in Oakland a couple of hours ago, and I said, someone said, well, what are you doing for, as Shakur mentioned, for that word? And I said, oh, I don't celebrate that. That's thankstaking. That's the land is stolen. And they're like, you're right. Because African people know that. We just get caught up in the propaganda. And so I said, and then someone else said, well, why are you calling it that? I'm like, that's what it is. I said, if I took that watch off your arm right now, you wouldn't say, well, I'm giving you that watch. You would say I took it. So they took this land. They didn't do it. They had the Homestead Act, and when they didn't have policy before that, they were just out and out barbaric and violent and stole it. So that's what it is. That's what they've done. That's what these people do. That's what they do to get everything they do is steal, rob, and kill. And so we're just simply articulating that. People can get mad at us for that, but they cannot refute the truths in that. And if people are talking about, in the last 3 weeks, you know how things go. 3 weeks, people are watching videos. So now everybody has a PhD in the Palestinian struggle, and that's great. But you cannot talk about the oppression of the Palestinian people, settler colonialism against the Palestinian people, and sitting here in the Americas and not talk about settler colonialism and oppression against the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. You can't talk about one without talking about the other. And you can't talk about either one of those without talking about the colonial oppression of African people worldwide. You have to talk about all of that, or else you ain't talking about none of that. So that's what we're saying when we talk about the psychology of liberation, for example. And the African on the picture in the screen, Frantz Fanon, was an African born in Martinique in the Caribbean, and he was a doctor of psychology. And he moved, a psychiatrist, and he moved to Algeria and participated in the Algerian Revolution and became actually a major participant and leader in the Algerian Revolution in North Africa in the late 50s and early 60s. And he was also, authored many books on this question of the psychology of oppression and liberation. Black Skin, White Mask is one of the books he wrote. The Wretched of the Earth is considered a must-read by revolutionaries who have a understanding of anti-colonialism. And so this picture is of Fanon speaking at the All African Peoples Conference in Ghana in 1958, in December of 1958. This was a conference organized by Kwame Nkrumah. And Nkrumah founded this conference because he wanted to bring African people all over the world who saw the necessity for Pan-Africanism. And Frantz Fanon was without question a Pan-Africanist. And he wanted to bring these Africans there, and he wanted to have discussions about how we could unite as a people and liberate our mother Africa. And at that point, there were many people who played critical roles in the African independence movement, and later, many of them within the African liberation movement who participated in this All African Peoples Conference. Of course, Kwame Nkrumah was the founder and convener. Ahmed Sekou Touré, another ideologue for the All African People's Revolutionary Party, was there and participated. Patrice Lumumba, as a young man, was there, who was just starting in the National Congolese movement in the Congo, and went to Ghana and was inspired by what he experienced at the All African People's Conference to ratchet up the push to gain independence in the Congo. And it was at the All African People's Conference that Lumumba, who was very close in age to Frantz Fanon, they met and became very good friends. And both of them, mentored by Kwame Nkrumah, became very good friends. But up until the point that Fanon spoke at that conference, the dominant theme was nonviolence. That was the theme at the All African People's Conference. That we need to achieve our liberation through nonviolence. And Fanon got up there, the picture you see on the screen, and he told the assembled delegates that we will never gain freedom and liberation until we can speak the language of the people who are oppressing us. And if they are oppressing us through violence, then we have to figure out how to organize and strike back at them and beat the hell out of them to get them up off of our backs. And that's what we mean when we say the psychology of liberation. And that is very important because a lot of us today will sit around here and talk about, well, they got us outnumbered. It ain't but 2 million Indians, so they can't win. They can't get their land back, even though I want them to, because it ain't but 2 million of them. And again, this is a question of the psychology of liberation. How do we think about our ability and capacity to become free? Because Leonard Peltier, the great indigenous freedom fighter who has been in prison for 45 plus years because of his work on the Pine Ridge Reservation area in South Dakota and for indigenous people overall. In his book, he wrote that the European asked him, well, how can you get your freedom when it's so few, he said Indians, so few Indians. And Leonard Peltier said there's actually millions upon millions of us. As soon as the so-called Latinos wake up and recognize that they're indigenous people, then that increases our capacity. The psychology of liberation, our ability to believe that we can win and organize to achieve victory. That's what Fanon was talking about in Ghana in 1958. That's what Leonard Peltier was talking about. That's what we need to talk about today. That power is conceived at conception. The first thing we have to do is believe that we can win. As long as we're walking around here afraid to speak up, long as we're walking around here, well, I don't want anybody to be mad at me. I don't want anybody to be upset. You should already be upset. If you aren't upset right now, you need to check for a heartbeat. If you're not upset, you should already be upset. You should be upset at a whole lot of things. You should be upset that the masses of peace and justice loving people on the planet Earth are forced to suffer indignities, forced to suffer death and destruction simply for standing up and trying to live as human beings. If that doesn't make you upset, then you don't have a heartbeat. You don't have a brain function. You don't have anything except the rote ability to eat, pass gas, defecate, urinate, have sex, and do the basic things that do nothing to separate you from lower animals, lower level animals. You may as well just get on all fours, crawl, and roar, because you're no different than lower animals. The thing that makes us different is our ability to reason. And so we have to understand the importance of power being conceived at conception. We got to stop all this negative talk and recognize that we are on the side of justice. We are on the right side of history. And that alone is the only weapon we need to get our freedom, to organize our people and get our freedom. And because I believe that to the fullest extent of my existence, it's not difficult for me to believe that the indigenous people will regain these lands back. I know for a lot of you don't believe that, but it's not difficult for me to believe that they will regain these lands back, because my entire life has been about people telling me what I wasn't going to be able to do and how I was going to be able to fail. And I didn't listen to any of those goddamn people. And here today, now they're asking me to borrow money. So I know that I had to decide early on in my life that I was going to look at life from the concept of what needed to happen and how the hell I was going to get there to make it happen. Power being conceived at conception. Anybody in your life that's telling you that Africa would not be free, African people would not be liberated, Palestinian people will not get their land back, African people will not get their land back, indigenous people will not get these lands back. Anybody talking to you about that, that's somebody you don't need in your life. I don't have anybody in my life that talks like that. I don't have anybody in my life. And even if they believe some of that, they know better than to say it around me, because they'll get blasted, as they should. And that's because I don't want all that negativity around me. And when Shakura was a little child, we didn't allow people to talk like that around her. We would correct them and tell them, you don't come here talking like that. We don't talk like that. We recognize this is indigenous people's land. If you don't recognize that, you're in the wrong place. Get the hell out of here. We'll pack you a ham sandwich and send you on your way. So that's what we got to understand. Power is conceived at conception. And we have to believe in ourselves and our collective people. We have to believe that we can win and stop all this mealy mouth poot butt, cowardly analysis that, well, we can't do nothing without the Democratic Party, without the Labor Party, without the white man. We can't do nothing without them. We don't need anybody that doesn't need us. We don't need anybody that doesn't need us. We have all the intelligence that we need. We have some of the most intelligent people on the planet Earth, some of the most creative people on the planet Earth, people with the biggest hearts and minds for humanity on the planet Earth. We don't need anything that the capitalist system has. In fact, I don't want anything that the capitalist system has. Only thing that I know that we need is the hearts and minds of the masses of the people. So if you're indigenous and you have a true, genuine heart for freedom for your people, all you need is the ability to go out and work with your people. And the more you do that, the more you'll realize that that's all that needs to happen. And the same, of course, for all of our people, all of our African people, and all peace and justice-loving people. All you need is the belief that we can be free. That's all you need. The language of liberation creates confidence in our struggle. If we understand that language, a lot of us aren't bilingual with that language. We only speak the colonizers' language. We have to grow so we can understand the language of liberation. The two pictures on your screen are African people rising up, demanding justice in Niger, in Africa. The bottom picture is people rising up in Europe, demanding justice for the Palestinian people. There are just as many people who will rise up and demand justice for the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. I just didn't have a picture right now to illustrate that, but the point is that these are clear examples for us that people are ready to move. The only problem is we, those of us who claim to be dedicated to this work, we are not critically organized in a way that will allow us to go and get those people. That's all the problem that exists. The minute that we go and develop our program and have the humility to carry it out, we will be free, as Kwame Ture used to say, like the sun follows the moon. And so we're talking about the more we practice denormalizing unhumanistic institutions like thankstaking, calling them out, that's an important first step for us getting to the level of organization that we need to have. What we're doing when we do that is we're creating a milieu for the conditions for progress for us to happen. And the way we do that is by deprogramming people. I'm not talking about beating people over the head, but what I'm saying is just say, when people say to you, have a happy, you know what, say, oh, I don't celebrate that. That's what I do to everybody. I don't celebrate that. You don't? I'm like, no, I don't celebrate that. That's theft of land and murder and annihilation against the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. It's disrespectful. Oh, I didn't mean it like that. Now you got them on the defensive. I'm like, I know you didn't mean it like that, but I'm going to take, I don't want that in my spirit. So that's why I'm telling you that. I don't celebrate holidays, so-called holidays of genocide. I don't do that. So we're not into that. Well, I don't do it either. They always say that. And that's how you know that your argument is on the correct side of history. Well, I don't celebrate it either. And then I say, oh, okay, so you're eating turkey, you're eating dressing, you're eating it on the day that these crooks and thieves designated, but you're not celebrating the holiday. Just because you don't say that word, you're still perpetuating the values of the holiday, because you're not getting up and saying, this is indigenous people's land, let's have a conversation about that. So by default, you're supporting the institutionalization of the theft of this land, and you're celebrating that. And the only way that that's not the case is you have to make a decision to stand up, call it out, point it out, have a conversation. So that's a call to action we have for everybody that listens to this. You have an obligation. When you're sitting there, you can't just be thinking, oh, I'm hungry, I got to eat. You got to be saying, how can we have at least a 5-minute conversation about what is going on with this question of theft of land? We have to have that conversation, at least a 5-minute conversation. I guarantee you, if you're here at my house, that conversation will take place. I guarantee you it'll take place. You got to do it. It can't just be me and Shakura and the people in the APRP doing it. You got to do it. Everybody got to do it. So we got to create a culture and an environment where this is the norm, where this happens. And when we start to do that, that's when we start to deconstruct this nonsense. But as long as you sitting there at the table, well, I ain't gonna say nothing about that because they might tell me I can't eat, and I sure do want me some of that dressing. Well, as long as that's what your mindset is, and that's the best you can do, then I hope you eat the goddamn dressing and get indigestion, on precedented case of indigestion, because that's all you are is a bunch of hot goddamn air. So you should get indigestion. You should be you should be licking at the chops to raise this question on that day. And so we're calling you out that that's what you need to do on that day. And once we begin to behave like this, we create the conditions where we can move forward, because now we're operating on a foundation of justice. Is it going to be easy? Hell no. Nothing worthwhile is easy. But is it going to be correct? Absolutely. Will you have more respect for yourself because you're doing it? Absolutely. Absolutely. You won't get indigestion. I don't get indigestion, because I'm telling folks that's what this represents. And if you got a day off, it's only because people fought for you to get the day off. The Pilgrims didn't do a goddamn thing for you. Never have and never will. No point in your life will Pilgrim do anything to improve your life. I can guarantee you that that's not going to happen. The only thing that's going to improve your life is people that fought for these days off, that fought for workers to have it, for indigenous struggle that's struggling to create a spirit around this that has a dominant level of humanity for all colonized people who recognize that, to participate in that spirit and strengthen it even more. This is the beauty of what you're seeing with the question of Palestine. I see so many Africans out there standing up for the Palestinian people. This is a beautiful thing. We should stand up. I saw a Palestinian activist talk about how African people humanize this country, and it made me emotional, because Kwame Ture used to say that all the time. We've humanized this backward country. And so, this is what we want. This is a beautiful thing. They're inspired by us. We're inspired by them. And we need to have the same energy for the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. We can't be acting like, well, that's, yeah, you're right. But there's no goddamn but. We have to have the same energy and raise that the same way. All the time, we have to raise that. We don't just talk about it in November. We talk about it all the time. When we had work study yesterday, we talked about it. When we had the event last week, we talked about it. When we had the event before that, the week in Oakland, we talked about it. We had the American Indian movement there when we talked about it. We talk about it all the time. So these are African people. When I spoke at the Anarchist Book Fair last Sunday, I talked about the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. We talk about it everywhere that we participate in, because this is a part of the struggle for justice that we're engaged in. If we're not fighting in a vacuum, we understand that. We know a lot of people don't. A lot of people are confused. They're not even participating in the struggle for justice. When people talk like that, I know they're not participating. They say things like, well, nobody is here for Black people, so I don't pay attention to anyone else. Anytime someone starts to talk to me like that, I just tell them, I know you're not involved in our struggle for justice. Well, I am. I'm like, well, what organization you're in? Well, I ain't got to be in the organization. I'm like, you ain't in the organization. Oh, I know what organization you're in. You're in the organization of cerebral confusion. That's your organization. When does your organization meet? Whenever the hell your brain says, oh, I want to meet today, and then you sit there on your ass, and then an hour later you say, we just met, because the only thing that your organizing work consists of is whatever idealistic bourgeoisie, idealistic confusion passes through that thing that you call a brain between your ears. So you're in the organization of idealistic confusion. That's what that is. We've got to get beyond that. And start, the minute people talk to me, I know that. And I'm sick of it. I'm tired of hearing it. And I tell them that I don't care if they get insulted. I don't give a damn. They should be insulted. If you're a good organizer, you should be making people uncomfortable at least sometimes. If you're walking around here trying to make sure nobody's offended, you might as well sit your ass down. You're not doing anything to advance this struggle. So how the hell is everybody going to be comfortable in this backward cesspool society that we live in. People supposed to be uncomfortable. The oppressed are uncomfortable. We got to make these other people uncomfortable so they can recognize that their discomfort is going to continue to grow until justice is served. That's what this is all about. I'm not confused at all. You can be mad at me for saying it, but you cannot say that I'm wrong. You can't say that unless you're a damn liar, and a lot of you are liars. But we don't listen to liars. We're talking about people who are genuinely concerned about justice and forward progress. That's what this is about. So how we act, who we are, how we act, like what do? What does that consist of? We have to understand, you all, that propaganda is a tool. Propaganda is not a bad word. It's a tool. That's all it is. It's a mechanism for us to inform people. What is propaganda? Propaganda is you don't have necessarily the opportunity to sit down and read a whole book to somebody. That's not how the society that we live in works. You're not going to have that opportunity to do that for most of your life. So what you want to be able to do is hit people with various nuggets of the truth. Give them that. That's what we mean when we say propaganda. So an example is the one that I've been using since I've been participating in my part of the presentation today. I don't celebrate that day. I call it thankstaking. That's what it is. It's the land was stolen. I never say that to anybody and it doesn't start a conversation. And I don't just say that as an individual. At my job, I'm going to do a presentation next week on the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. You don't believe them? Call them and ask them. I work for SEIU, the labor union. Call them and ask them every year. They know they got a presentation coming on the indigenous people in October and November. That's going down. They know that. And they got to talk about it. And there's indigenous people in there, whether they call themselves Latinos or not. And I tell them, this is your land. You got to act like it. You got to act like this is your land. I guarantee you, if I was in Africa and these people were in here acting like they were, I'd tell them, get the hell here. We need here. I'll meet you at the beach. Well, what are we meeting at the beach for? Because you're going to get a kayak and kayak your ass back to Europe if you don't improve your behavior. You are not going to be here acting like that. This is our land. That's how I feel when I'm at home in Africa. This is ours. You are a guest here. I don't even know if you're a welcome guest. So if you don't act right, get the hell out, because one day we will organize capacity to throw your ass out. So that's how I tell them, y'all got to act like it's your land. You know, one of the people was talking about some African people there that I can't stand. We're making fun of we have land rights ceremonies to start all our events. That's one of the things we've implemented. We have one of the sisters who's here that does the land rights ceremony. Well, yeah, and they were making fun of it. And the indigenous person was watching them, and they told me, and I'm like, why didn't you, if you didn't want to say nothing, why didn't you come get me? I would have come cuss them the hell out. I don't like none of them anyway. But even if they were my best friends, well, they wouldn't be my best friends talking like that. But even if they were, I would still tell them, because that's the work that we have to do. That's what we have to do. If you're not willing to do that, what the hell good are you? No one is divorced from the influence of propaganda. All of us are influenced by propaganda. All of us are influenced by it every single day of our lives. The only problem is that the forces of justice do not see the importance of engaging in consistent propaganda. And that's what we have to do. We have to engage in consistent propaganda. The Americas belong to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, and they must get their lands back. That's all you have to say. That's all you have to say. That's the message. That's it. Capitalism and imperialism rely on propaganda, and because they do, the forces of justice have to rely on it as well. We have to be double diligent about propaganda than they are. We have to be more committed to propaganda than they are, because their institutions, like in the picture, the police and all that, they're constant in their propaganda. Well, we're criminals. Reason why the jails are filled with black, brown, and red people is because they're criminals. You hear, this is common propaganda today. They say it openly. Well, black people commit the majority of crimes. That's a goddamn lie. There is not even the enemy's data says that. But some of you who just heard that, you believe that. Oh, your black people commit more crimes because you listening to their propaganda. And you don't have sense enough to double check it on your own, because there's nothing between your ears but horse manure. So that's why we're saying we've got to wake up and recognize that these people propagandize us 24/7, 365 days a year. And we got to start propaganda. I told a white man the other day, he was like, black people commit 51% of crime. I said, that's a right wing talking point that you got. You too stupid to come up with it by yourself. I know you are, because I had a shirt on that said the slave labor created wealth in this country. He was mad at that. I said, you're too stupid to do that. So that's where you got that. I said, you can't prove that. Where'd you get it? You can't prove that. I said, every population in this society is convicted of crime consummate to its percentage of the population. That's an absolute fact, no matter what you say. And he was talking about, what about the big cities? I'm like, the highest crime area in this country is these poorer communities like Anchorage, Alaska. That's the highest crime city in the country. I'm not talking against the people in Anchorage. I'm just saying that they want you to believe it's Chicago. That's all they talk. A lot of you believe that. Oh, it's Chicago. They kill 1,000 people every weekend in Chicago. That's a goddamn lie. And stop that. Stop listening to their propaganda and learn how to develop our own propaganda. The Americas belong to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, and they must get their land back. Just like the African woman in the picture on the bottom, people overpower. Simple message, propaganda, resist. Simple message, propaganda. Everything you do should be about propaganda. Yesterday, the young Africans in the APRP work study circle, they were laughing at me, 3 of them, because I had that something on. I had a hoodie that said African. And the one African said, where do you get that? I said, well, your organization sells it. You should buy one. And they were like, but you have this stuff. And I said, when have you all ever seen me when I didn't have propaganda on? You've never seen me. I dress like that every day of my life with revolutionary propaganda on. And even in my job, and a couple of them see me in my job, I'm like, y'all, do I dress like this at work? Yes, you do. I'm like, everywhere I go, I have propaganda on about revolutionary change. You all, the problem is that you all got Nike on. You got Adidas on. You got all that nonsense on. All of us should have revolutionary propaganda on all the time. That's how we will change this environment, you all. So we want to thank you for joining us today. And we ask you to come back next week. We're commemorating the escape of our comrade sister, Ashada Shakur, from the dungeon prisons in this country and her going to Cuba. But we're going to talk about Assata Shakur and the Black Liberation Army. Not much is talked about the BLA, the Black Liberation Army. So we want to talk about them and give them honor and respect next week. So please join us, same time, same space, everything else. And then we want to ask you, the QR code on the screen there is for Burkina Books, our comrades in Burkina Faso. Please become a sponsor as little as $5 a month. Please let us know you're doing it. Very, 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 very important. Support our revolutionary political work on the ground throughout Africa. Go to the APRP site, aprp-intl.org, and join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You should join or join some organization. Join the Black Alliance for Peace, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, whatever African organization you want to. And we had, I told the Europeans we had a couple of Africans that we recruited for the APRP at the Anarchist Book Festival. And I told the Europeans, y'all got to be in organizations too. So a couple of them said, yeah, we want to start political education-based organizations. So I'm going to work with them to get them started, because everybody's got to be organized. And I told them, we can't, white people get in our way of our freedom. So y'all got to organize your own people. So we'll help you get started. You got to do the work. So that's what we do. And then also we want to recognize Hood Communists, www.hoodcommunist.org, looking for articles and submissions against imperialism, against capitalism, anti-colonialists. So submit articles there. The email is hoodcommunist@protonmail.org. So go ahead and send your articles in there. Please go to betterworld.me and you can get these videos. This one will be ready in about 30 minutes or so. And we have all the other programs in the APRP. You can find out those programs at the APRP site, aprp-intl.org. and my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. It is my humble addendum to Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. You're sitting up in the belly of the beast in capitalist America. You want to know how you can support our Pan-African work on the ground in Africa. That's what that book is about. So you should want to get it and check it out. It talks about how we can concretely support building revolutionary Pan-Africanist capacity in the neighborhoods we live in this country, how we can support the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere in their fight for freedom and forward progress. These are all the things that we want to see happen. 2024 should be different, you all. Don't be coming at us with that lame nonsense. It's election year. It's a very important election. It's important for us to organize for our liberation. So we thank you for joining us today. And we want to ask you to go ahead and enjoy the rest of your evening. Join an organization working for justice. Forward ever, backwards never. Stay strong. See you next week.